Going live. Well, the screen just said I'm live, so I guess it's time to get started. Good evening, everybody. Getting ready to do our live review here on period 8, 1945 to 1980. And I discovered just a few minutes ago, literally like 15 minutes ago, as I went to get all this set up. Normally I have like a PowerPoint and stuff that I like to use as a guide. I got no PowerPoint for this unit. Thought I did, I don't. So I'm just going to try to talk my way through it. And this should be interesting. So feel free to shoot me questions in the chat. Feel free to shoot me questions via Remind. I got my phone sitting right here, and I actually make sure I have the volume up so I can hear it go off. No, I don't. So there you go. So if you have questions, you can send them, and I will answer them. My goal is really just to try to talk our way through this time period. I'll probably miss some minute details and stuff, and you can fill those in, but I'm just going to look at big ideas for the Cold War era. And I'll be honest, I'm going to focus mostly on the Cold War stuff. With regards to society and stuff like that, I'll answer your questions. I'll fill in where I can, but there's an awful lot to talk about in this unit. So I'm going to go ahead and get right to it. If someone can test the chat window for me and just type something in there like, hey, Lennox, or something like that, so I know that it's working. I will tell you that I have a lag here of about 45 seconds. So if you post something and I don't see it right away, don't worry. I will catch up to it. So, all right. So I'm actually just holding out, waiting to see if something comes up in the chat. So I want to make sure that works. Let me see if I have it set right. What does this do? There we go. Put that over here. Well, maybe not. There we go. It works. Thank you, Afrin. I appreciate it. All right, so here we go. This time period goes from 1945 to 1980. And you got to recognize that it is World War II that sets up the stage for going into the Cold War. Specifically, the conferences that were set up during World War II. I'm going to go back to Yalta. And the Yalta Conference is when you're going to have the big three come together. And at the Yalta Conference, what's going to happen is we're going to set up the stage to create the UN, but we're also going to set up the stage to create this division between the Soviet bloc and the rest of Europe. Now, Stalin is going to start talking right away about how he wants buffer nations between him and the rest of Europe to prevent them from being attacked in the future. And what's going to happen is FDR is just honestly going to allow it to happen. He's not going to say no to Stalin. So what we're going to see immediately after World War II is the Soviet takeover of various European countries, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, all the areas that the Germans held during World War II. The Soviets are going in, liberating them from the Germans, and then enforcing their own control over those areas. So that's the stage of the Cold War. Now, when we go into the Cold War, I want you to remember the 6 C's. Communism, Cold War, containment, and then you have the other ones of civil rights, conformity, and consumerism. Now, I'm going to talk about the first 3. So we're looking at the Cold War's first C. Second one is communism. Third is containment. We were afraid of the expansion of communism into the rest of the world. As I've said numerous times, communism is attracted to downtrodden countries, to depressed economic countries that are economically depressed. And that's exactly what exists in Europe at this time. I mean, we just came out of this war. So the United States is looking at this threat of communism and basically trying to come up with a plan of how to deal with it. And that plan is going to be containment. We can't stop communism from existing. It's already here. Communism is like ketchup from a bottle. When you pour the ketchup out of the bottle, you can't get the ketchup back in, but you can stop more from coming out of the bottle. That's what containment is all about. Stopping the expansion, stopping the spread, stopping the growth of communism anywhere in the world. Our first area of the world that we're going to look at is Turkey and Greece. Now, Turkey and Greece were like prime pickings for the Soviets in the late 1940s. They were both ravaged by the war. They have a lot of economic hardship. They're going into a depression. And they're close. They're so close to the Soviet Union. I mean, if the Soviet Union sneezed, Turkey and Greece would say, bless you. So it was the perfect place for Stalin to be looking to expand his Soviet, quote, empire or his Soviet bloc. So the very first thing we're going to do is Truman's going to look at how can we protect Turkey and Greece. And that's where our first foreign policy is going to come out, and that's the Truman Doctrine. The Truman Doctrine was about sending military aid to Greece and Turkey to prevent the spread of communism to come into the country. Now, keep in mind, we're not sending any troops into Greece or Turkey. We are just sending military aid. Guns, tanks, planes, whatever, just no troops, no boots on the ground, and with the idea that they would use that to protect themselves from communism, and that's going to work. It's going to prevent. Stalin's going to see it. He's not going to push the issue. So we've just successfully protected the spread of communism into Turkey and Greece. But there's more. There's other parts of Europe that are in danger as well. Pretty much all of Western Europe. The Secretary of State, George Marshall, is going to go and tour Western Europe right after the war. And he's going to say, man, it's been beat up bad. I mean, whether it be France or England or Spain or Portugal or Italy, they've all just been beat up bad and they need help. And so what we're going to do with that is we're going to institute what's known as the Marshall Plan. The Marshall Plan was about sending financial help to Western Europe. Now, make sure you know the difference between the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan. The Truman Doctrine, military aid. The Marshall Plan, all about the money. Marshall starts with M, money starts with M. Marshall Plan is about sending money and pumping money into Western Europe so they can use it to start rebuilding. I mean, here's the cash. Build, schools, build hospitals, build airports, build whatever you need to get your countries going again. And so we're going to finance the rebuilding of Europe after the war, not as a loan, not as a grant or anything like that, but as a foreign policy to stop the spread of communism. It's all about containment, guys. This is, if you want the foreign policy for the United States, I mean, we went from a period of isolationism to a period of imperialism. Now we're living in a period of containment. So that's your key word going forward tonight. Where we're going to move into next, though, is going to be Germany. So we've started rebuilding in Europe. Things are going well. I mean, after I want to say we pumped in, like, don't quote me on the number, I want to say like $60 billion, maybe more, maybe less, but it was successful. And within the next 3 to 4 years, we're going to see these countries rebound. In fact, their trade dollars are going to be higher than they were prior to World War II. So that was also successful. But there's still going to be more conflict. There's still going to be more challenges with the Soviets and their ultimate goals. Now, another thing that happened at Yalta, yes, FDR allowed Stalin to just move into these satellite nations and create this Soviet bloc. But the other thing that was decided at Yalta was what to do with Germany once the war was over. And we decided that we were going to divide Germany into 4 parts. And the Soviets would get a part, England would, France would, and the United States would. We also did that with the capital city of Berlin. Berlin was located in the Soviet center of Germany. So we decided we're also going to divide up Berlin. Same way, 4 equal parts. Soviets, United States, England, and France. Well, in the, the late 1940s, right around 1949, 1948, Stalin decides he wants all of Berlin. And he is going to set up what's known as the Berlin Blockade. And that's going to, the purpose of the Berlin blockade was to prevent anybody from getting in and anybody from getting out. And he specifically put up the blockade around the other three sections of Berlin, around the French and the English and the American section. And those people that are there are trapped. And the idea was that he was going to, I guess in a sense, wait them out until they had no choice but to turn to the Soviets for help. And again, it's that idea that depression, economic depression or hunger or whatever is a catalyst to lead to the entry of communism into your life. So that's what Stalin is counting on. I'm going to blockade all these people in there, not going to let anybody in, nobody out, and I'm just going to leave them there until they're begging for us to come in and help them. Well, we can't have that. We can't let Berlin fall to the Soviets. So this is when Truman is going to institute the Berlin airlift. And the Berlin airlift, we're going to know over a 13-month period, we're going to be taking flying supplies in constantly into Berlin, to keep the people fed, to keep them, going during this time. And it's going to get pushed to the point where Stalin is just going to give up. He's going to surrender and take the blockade down. Another victory for containment, another victory for this policy of stopping the spread of communism. That's going to take us into the 1950s. Now, one thing I want you to know, and I got it in front of me here on your review sheet, there's a key term you should probably know, and that term is collective security. We're going to start seeing alliances forming in the late 1940s, each with similar attitudes and similar goals. The first one is going to be NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And under the NATO principles, all these Western European countries and the United States are going to come together under the same banner of stopping the spread of communism. And this idea of collective security is we've got each other's back. If there's a threat to one of our countries, it's a threat to all of us. So we have the security that we have friends. Now, not to be outdone, the Soviets are going to create their own alliance system. It's going to be called the Warsaw Pact. And the Warsaw Pact is going to be made up of all the Soviet bloc nations. And it's just like a mirror of NATO. So they're kind of facing off each other. So these become the two primary players during this Cold War era. NATO versus the Warsaw Pact, okay? Sorry, text coming in, that's not from my students. So this is where we're at. So keep that in mind, that idea of collective security. That's going to take us into the 1950s. Now, what's going to happen is, as you know, we had the bomb that we used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. By 1947, the Soviets are going to have their own bomb. And then by 1952, the United States is going to build an even bigger bomb, the hydrogen bomb. And another year later, the Soviets are going to build their version of that bomb. And what we're entering into is this nuclear arms race. This is another characteristic of the Cold War, is the arms race. And a natural progression of this arms race is what we call MAD, mutually assured destruction. The more weapons that each other build, the less likely, the less likely we are to actually use those weapons, because we know that if we fire on the Soviet Union, before that missile can reach them, they're going to fire on us as well. So we're living in this threat of an imminent Soviet nuclear attack, but also knowing that we're under the umbrella of mutually assured destruction. That idea is going to give us some protection. But we can't hang on to that alone. We can't let Soviets or the enemies or anyone know that we're counting on this mad principle. So this is where the idea of brinkmanship comes in. And brinkmanship is that theory that a country is willing to go right up to the brink of war, never letting on that they don't want to go to war, but taking it right to that moment where anybody else is thinking, man, if we don't turn back now, it's over. And the United States became experts at brinkmanship. It was introduced by the Secretary of State under Eisenhower, John Foster Dulles. And the thing to make brinkmanship work is no, we don't want to go to war, but we will. We're going to see that with Korea. Korea is going to be the next test of our containment policy. Korea had been divided into two sections, North and South Korea. North Korea was a communist country. South Korea had more of a democratic governing. Now, after the World War II, that's when Korea was divided, and so we're going to see this push for North Korea where they want to expand down into South Korea. They want to reunite the country and make it a communist country. Give me just 1 second. The dog went somewhere he wasn't supposed to. Ugh. Get out of there. Come on. You boys. All right. Sorry about that. Okay, so you have this push from North Korea where they want to come down and they will start invading into South Korea. Now, this is not necessarily going to be an American war. It's a United Nations war. Because what's going to happen is we are going to go to the United Nations to lodge, look for action from them to stop this invasion into South Korea. We're going to see what's very interesting is when the United Nations was formed, the Security Council was formed as one of the main governing bodies. And there are 5 permanent members on the Security Council. It's going to be the United States, the Soviet Union, China, France, and Great Britain. Those are your 5 permanent members. Any one of these members has the authority to veto any action that the United Nations takes. Well, what's going to happen with Korea is about the time that the Korean War is about to start, China is going to fall to communism. But we have 2 separate governments in China. You have the communist government, and then you have an exiled democratic government. The United States refused to recognize the communist government in China. They would only recognize the democratic government that was set up in Taiwan. It's the same thing for the United Nations. They would not recognize communist China as a viable nation. The Soviet Union is going to protest the fact that communist China is not being recognized in the UN. And they're going to protest this by leaving the UN. So they're not even in the picture at this point. They're having their silent protest over here with the rest of communist China. Well, the discussion about Korea comes up while they're protesting. And a vote is taken by the Security Council as to whether or not the UN is going to get involved in this debate or get involved in this fight to protect South Korea. Well, communist China is not recognized as a nation in the UN. The Soviets are not there because they're protesting. And so there is no one on the Security Council to veto this action. So with the authority of the Security Council, the UN is going to send forces into South Korea to protect them from a North Korean invasion. They're going to work with American troops, and all of them are going to be under the command of Douglas MacArthur. Now, the way the Korean conflict, so it wasn't officially a war, the conflict, the way it went was we were divided along the 36th parallel, and we had, it got pushed all the way to the south, and then it got pushed all the way to the north. And we actually, the Allies, or the UN and the United States, had pushed the North Koreans almost to the border of China. It's at this point that Douglas MacArthur says we need to send the nuclear bombs into China. That will end this permanently. It'll end this expansion of Soviet control. President Truman says no. And MacArthur's going to go out and speak negatively about him in public and stuff. He's going to end up being fired. So we still have the war going on in Korea. By this point, the North Koreans start pushing us back south towards that neutral zone area. And when that happens, now we're going to see a new president come into America. That president is going to be Dwight Eisenhower. One of the campaign promises that Eisenhower made while running for office is he was going to end the war in Korea. Now, Eisenhower has no problem with brinkmanship. And so what's going to happen is he's going to go into Korea and he's going to basically take over and readjust the plans, readjust how they're going to attack and all this other stuff, and threaten to use nuclear weapons. Say, I don't have a problem with it. And that's going to push us to this stalemate. We get to a point where the North Koreans and China say, hey, whoa, let's take a step back. And the UN said, let's go ahead and take a step back. We don't want this to go all nuclear on us. And that's when we issued the ceasefire. And that's going to bring an end to the Korean conflict. I'm not going to say that it's permanently ended because we just ordered a ceasefire. We never had a truce or a treaty or anything like that. But the fighting came to an end. So we didn't necessarily lose Korea, and we didn't lose South Korea to communism. So technically, that's kind of a win for us, is how we looked at it at that point. As we go further into Eisenhower's presidency, we're going to see a couple of his domestic policies. One of his big domestic policies is going to be the interstate highway system. The whole purpose of the interstate highway system was to support our country with its Cold War defense strategy. Every single interstate highway that was built with the purpose of being able to quickly move weapons and soldiers throughout the country in case we ever fell under attack. And so Eisenhower, just about everything he did, dealt with the Cold War. Okay? I think, let me talk quickly about some more of the domestic things that went on during Eisenhower's presidency. One of the big things that's going to happen, I got a text here, let me check it, sorry. Oh my gosh, okay. As soon as I say you guys text me, another group is texting me, and I'm just like, Another big development during Eisenhower's presidency is going to be the Supreme Court decision of Brown v. Board of Education. And that's going to overturn Plessy versus Ferguson, which is going to start desegregating public schools. One of the first examples of desegregation under Eisenhower's presidency is going to be in Little Rock, Arkansas. And we're going to see the Little Rock 9 form. 9 young people your age who are going to integrate Little Rock Central High School. What's going to happen is when they arrive, crowds are going to be there and they're going to block their entry in the school. They're not going to be able to start school on that day. Eisenhower, in response to this, is going to order the 101st Airborne Division to go down to Little Rock in order to protect these 9 students and make sure that Central High School is integrated. And those soldiers will stay with them there all year long and escort them back and forth to school every single day. I'm trying to think if there's anything else in the Eisenhower. I know I'm skipping things. I got to circle back because there are a couple things that I didn't talk about with regards to the Cold War. The first one is the long telegram where George Kennan went and looked at the Soviet Union and told the American government that the communists are intending to expand their reach throughout, and communism must be stopped. That's where we got the idea of containment. The other thing that's going to come out during this time is NSC 68, the National Security Council report number 68. And what that's going to do is, reinstate this idea that communism is an absolute threat to the world. And we needed to stop it where it was. All of that leading into Korea and all that is going to bring out another theory, and that's going to be called the domino theory. Eisenhower completely bought into the domino theory, which is why he said we have to win in Korea. If Korea falls, we'll start seeing other countries fall. Now, this is going to actually lead to yet another conflict with the spread of communism, and that's going to be in French Indochina. When we go into French Indochina, it's going to be the same scenario that we saw in Korea. We're split between North and South. At the time, the French had control, but the northern part of French Indochina is led by a man by the name of Ho Chi Minh, who was a communist, and he wants to reunite what will become known as Vietnam. They're going to lodge a civil war against the French, and they're going to defeat the French. And in 1954, the country of Vietnam, North and South Vietnam, are going to be created. Now, part of the treaty or whatever that's going to be signed, that's going to be set up at the Geneva Conference, is there is going to be a North and a South Vietnam. North Vietnam will be under the leadership of Ho Chi Minh, and it'll be under communist rule. Now, Ho Chi Minh was a communist. I'm not going to say that he was like a friend of the Soviets. I mean, he would accept their help, but he wasn't seeking their help. But he did believe in communism. In South Vietnam, we're going to set up Diem as the president. Now, Diem was, I mean, we could call it a democratic government, but Diem was a ruthless leader. And you were going to see, just the people cannot stand him. Diem was, he was almost on the verge of dictatorship. He was a Catholic trying to rule a Buddhist nation. And that's going to cause a lot of problems. And in the video I showed you and everything, you saw pictures of monks burning themselves in protest of the rule of Diem. But Americans, we looked at him and he said, he wants to fight communism, so we're okay with that for right now. So in 1954, you see the split of North and South Vietnam, but we have communism once again rearing its ugly head. Eisenhower is actually going to start sending advisors into Vietnam, not in large numbers, but he will start sending advisors into Vietnam to help the South Vietnamese prevent the expansion of communism into South Vietnam. And now that's what's going on in the 1950s during Eisenhower's presidency. Now take that and put that on the back burner and put it on low, because it's slowly going to start boiling up. But in the mid-1950s, not so much a direct threat yet. So far, Diem is handling it. Ho Chi Minh's not showing really a need to want to start expanding right away. But it's coming. In the meantime, so Eisenhower has sent some troops over, some advisors over to Vietnam. Okay, things are good over there. Korea, we've kind of put that to bed. Now we have the big thing, and that's going to be the space race. The space race is going to start with the launching of Sputnik, the very first satellite, and it's going to be the Soviets who launched the first satellite. It's at this point that the United States says, oh my gosh, we are well behind everybody. We've got to step it up. And so we're going to launch our own space program. We're going to start with the Mercury program in the 50s. That's going to introduce us to people like Alan Shepard and John Glenn, who will be the first Americans into space. And then that's going to evolve into the Apollo program in the 1960s. So the Soviets sent up the first satellite, then they sent up the second satellite, then we sent up a satellite. Well, then they sent up a dog, and then we sent up a chimpanzee, and then they send up, they actually get the first man in space, but we get the first man to orbit the Earth several times and everything. So the space race is on, and this is all part of what's going on with the Cold War in the 1950s. A little bit closer to home, come back from outer space, let's go down to Cuba and see what's going on down there. During Eisenhower's presidency, a man by the name of Fidel Castro is going to overthrow the Cuban government, and he is going to take over. And guess what? He's going to implement communism into the country of Cuba. Now, the last thing the America wants is a war with Cuba. We don't want this. So what Eisenhower is going to do is he's going to pull in the CIA. And he's going to have the CIA come in, and they're going to start secretly training Cuban exiles, people who have left Cuba, with the idea we're going to train them, we're going to send them into Cuba, they're going to launch a coup against Fidel Castro, capture him, execute him, and then everything will be fantastic, and we'll get Cuba back. The problem is what's going to happen before any of that can happen is Eisenhower's presidency is going to come to an end. And when that happens, the next guy coming in is going to have to deal with what they've been dealing with in Cuba, with the CIA and all the other stuff. The next guy to come in, well, that's going to be John F. Kennedy. Now, John F. Kennedy's going to come in, and I'm not sure if he really realized everything that was going on down in Cuba, but he is going to approve the invasion of Cuba based on what Eisenhower left behind. This is going to become known as the Bay of Pigs invasion. The Bay of Pigs is going to turn into a major debacle. These Cuban exiles are going to go down there. Castro knew about it. He captured them right away. They called to Kennedy for help. Help! We're being overrun here. We're captured. Send help right away. Send the armies and the navies and the Marines. We need help because our goose is cooked down here. And Kennedy had to make a decision. Do I potentially start a war by sending American troops into Cuba, or do I let them cook? And he decided, I'm going to let them cook. We can't afford to start a war with Cuba. Well, when that happens, that's going to open the door for the Soviets to come in. Castro's going to call over to the Soviets, and he's going to say, hey, comrade, I need your help over here. The Americans tried to overthrow me. They weren't successful, but I don't know if I can hold them off again. So that's when you're going to see the Soviets start to move into Cuba. And this is what's going to launch what's known as the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Soviets are going to use Cuba basically as a launching pad. They're like, we can go ahead and we can put some nuclear warheads on the Cuban island, 90 miles away from the American coast. It can reach, our missiles will be able to reach anywhere in the United States. This is good. Now, don't just lump the Soviets all in this at once, because they're doing this in retaliation, because guess who has put nuclear warheads over in Turkey and Greece? That would be the United States. And so what's going to happen is what we call a good old-fashioned standoff. We're going to basically call out the Soviets and say, get your missiles out of there. And they're going to say no. And so what Kennedy is going to set up is a quarantine, basically a blockade, a naval blockade. They called it a naval quarantine. He put that around Cuba. So no Soviet ships could get in and no Soviet ships can get out. And so what's going to happen is the Soviet ships are going to come right up to that quarantine line and just stop. And what we're going to have for 13 days is basically a stare down as to who is going to blink first. We went up to DEFCON 2, which is the next to the highest DEFCON, which means our soldiers are getting ready. They're prepping for war. You know, everyone's being called in from their leave. The naval ships are fueling up. They're ready to go. They're loading the weapons. In the background, Kennedy and the Soviets are talking. And in a last-ditch effort, both agreed. Kennedy said, if we get our missiles out of Turkey, will you move your missiles out of Cuba? And they both agreed. And the conflict dissipates. But we were this close to war with the Soviet Union, which more likely would have been a nuclear war with the Soviet Union. That was called the Cuban Missile Crisis. All right, so let me think. That's how I got all that going. Let's go back to that pot we have boiling on the back burner, that pot of Vietnam. What we're going to see start happening in Vietnam is Ho Chi Minh is going to set up this alliance with the countries that neighbor Vietnam to the west, Laos and Cambodia. And they're going to create the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And he is going to use that trail to get goods and get weapons and everything they need up and down that trail and into not only North Vietnam, but South Vietnam. So it's very clear that they're looking to expand their holding into South Vietnam and reunite the country under a communist banner. Kennedy is going to start sending more advisors over there. We're still not sending troops to fight, but we are sending advisors going in there. And what's going to happen is at some point, we're going to get tired of Diem there in South Vietnam, and we are going to support a coup to overthrow him. So Diem is out now, and a new president comes in with American approval. Americans didn't lead the coup, but we didn't stop the coup either. And there might have been a few CIA agents there just kind of watching them, just saying. Not quite sure where Kennedy would have gone with regards to Vietnam. He was all about sending the advisors in, but I'm not really sure where he stood on sending actual troops to fight, because what's going to happen is on November 22nd, 1963, he will be assassinated. And so we'll never know how far Kennedy would have gone in Vietnam. But we're going to find out his successor, LBJ, is willing to go all the way. So LBJ is going to come into office Vietnam is still out there. He's still going to deal with it, but his first goal when he comes into office is to deal with American domestic policy, his, quote, war on poverty. And he's going to institute the Great Society. Now, Kennedy had his own plan as well. He had the New Frontier. He had started the Peace Corps, but none of that had really come to fruition, by the time he had been assassinated. So when LBJ comes in, he's going to put in his Great Society, which is going to be an extension of Kennedy's New Frontier, but with a whole bunch more, like Medicare, Medicaid, Head Start, all these other programs. It's going to be a massive government spending project. Think of it as the New Deal on steroids. That's what we're dealing with. And so he's going to put this Great Society in position, and he's going to start working on that. Once that's rolling, he is he is also going to get involved with the civil rights movement. There had been a big push for civil rights, obviously, since the 1950s. We saw that with Brown v. Board of Education. As we go into the 60s, we're going to see more and more civil rights movements starting to come up. Back in 1955 was when Rosa Parks refused to give her seat up on the bus. She will be arrested. This will lead to the Montgomery bus boycott. And the leader of the Montgomery bus boycott is going to be Martin Luther King Jr. This is what elevates him to national standing. This bus boycott is going to go on for a year, and eventually it's going to end up with a victory for civil rights, where they're going to say there's no assigned seating on buses anymore. And they're going to open that up, and we're going to start seeing the desegregation of the South slowly starting to begin. But it's going to be a fight. We'll have different movements such as the lunch counter movement, the sit-in movement. For instance, the Greensboro Four, who are going to be 4 African-American young men who are going to start a movement where young people throughout the South, and guys, these movements were young people. They were early college, late high school, your age. They're the ones who are spurring this on. And the sit-in movement is going to be where young people, black and white, are going to go sit at these lunch counters and not allow any paying customers to get in until they desegregate those and allow everyone to sit up at the lunch counter and order food. You're going to have the Freedom Summer and the Freedom Riders, these people who are going to ride buses throughout the South, not just in Montgomery where the bus boycott was, but throughout the South, trying to integrate or desegregate all the transportation systems in the South. You're going to have the Freedom Summer, where young people are going to travel down to Mississippi and try to get as many African Americans registered to vote during this time. And all of this, it caught the eye of Kennedy, and Kennedy was pushing a civil rights bill, but he didn't get it done during his presidency. So LBJ, when he comes in, he's going to pick up the mantle of the civil rights movement. Now, was it the same year? Yeah, the same year that Kennedy was assassinated is going to be the same year that Martin Luther King Jr. gives his famous "I Have a Dream" speech during the March on Washington. So all of that has been going on. So when LBJ comes in, he sets up his Great Society, and then he says, we need the civil rights legislation, and the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is going to be passed. It's quickly going to be followed up in 1965 with the Voting Rights Act of 65. That's going to remove all restrictions, like all literacy tests and everything like that, out of voting polls, so everyone will have the right to vote. And I believe it's going to be the 24th Amendment. You might want to correct me if I'm wrong, but the 24th Amendment that is going to make poll taxes illegal. So all of this is happening domestically when Johnson comes in. But we got to go back to this foreign policy. We got to go back to this Cold War. Because what's going to happen is Johnson is looking at what's going on in Vietnam. We have the advisors over there, but the North Vietnamese are getting stronger and stronger, and they're slowly moving into the South Vietnam area. And so LBJ, back to containment. We got to stop domino theory. We can't let Vietnam fall to communism. And so what's going to happen is he is going to send, we have advisors over there, he's going to send naval vessels that are going to be just off the coast of North Vietnam. And what we're going to run into is what's known as the Gulf of Tonkin controversy, where it's going to be reported that 2 naval vessels have been fired on by North Vietnamese planes or North Vietnamese ships. As soon as that happens, LBJ goes right to Congress and says they fired on our ships. We need to do something. And Congress is going to pass the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which gave LBJ carte blanche to do whatever he wanted over in Vietnam. I keep referring to it as a blank check because it's Congress who funds all this. And typically, a president can declare war, but Congress has to approve the funding for that war. Well, the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution gave a blank check, gave the funding to LBJ without any restrictions. And so he is going to use it right away. Now, what's interesting is almost within like an hour, it was that much time of the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution being passed, Robert McNamara, the Secretary of Defense, got word that, maybe they didn't fire on us. Maybe that was a shadow on our sonar. We can't be 100% sure. But by that time, the deed was done. The very first operation that LBJ is going to institute is going to be called Operation Rolling Thunder, a 3-year strategic bombing of North Vietnam by American planes. And just like that, America is now in the Vietnam War, and he's going to start sending troops over. Now, initially, guys, going into this was a difficult war from the very beginning. We didn't recognize who we were fighting, first of all. There was no clear enemy as far as we could tell. The Vietnamese obviously had home field advantage. They had help from other countries. Cambodia, Laos were supporting them in their fight. And the North Vietnamese had a lot of support in South Vietnam. And so you're going to see the rise of the Viet Cong. These are South Vietnamese people who were fighting for the North Vietnamese. So as we start sending troops in, we don't know what we're dealing with. This is a whole new style of guerrilla warfare that we've never experienced before in these dense jungles and trying to navigate through all that. And so it was going to be a very difficult fight from us from the very beginning. And the thing is, guys, the majority of Americans at this point, you can call it the silent majority or you could just call it, Americans, they supported this war in the beginning. They stood behind this war because they believed in fighting against the spread of communism. They bought into this idea of containment. And so us going into the war, there was really no pushback from the American people. Even with the draft, we had a draft going on. And we watched some of the videos that I shared with you guys and, letters from Vietnam. And these young men going in there, they were excited to go fight. They wanted to go fight and everything. So that's what we're dealing with. Everything, though, changes in 1968. 1968 is this major turning point, not only in the Vietnam War, but in American history as well. Let's just go through what happened. It starts in January with the Tet Offensive. The Tet Offensive was a North Vietnamese combined attack on numerous South Vietnamese locations. But it's being conducted on Tet, which is the Vietnamese New Year, a time you would never expect an attack. And so Tet is going to actually end up being a military victory for South Vietnam and the United States, but it's going to become a PR nightmare, a public relations nightmare, because following Tet, Walter Cronkite is going to get on TV and say, I do not see, or there doesn't appear to be a clear path to win this war. The best we can hope for is a stalemate. And with that, the wind was taken out of American sails. Americans were like, whoa, wait a minute. What do you mean there's no path to win this war? We've been fighting in this war for the last 3 years. And you've been telling us, government, you've been telling us, Johnson, you've been telling us, McNamara, that we were winning this war. And now all of a sudden, there's no clear path to victory? Here's another term you got to know. Credibility gap. We realized that the government had been lying to us. And we're going to start to see a major separation between the American people and the government. That's going to be followed up by the My Lai Massacre. The My Lai Massacre, we're going to see American troops go into a village where they're going to kill old men, women, and children. And the pictures are going to be plastered all over the evening news. And Americans are like, what the hell is going on? What are we doing here? Hope is starting to dwindle, is what's happening in 1968. And as it was dwindling at this point, what happens next is the assassination of two major leaders in our country. The first one is Martin Luther King Jr. is going to be assassinated. That will be followed by the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy, the younger brother of John F. Kennedy. Johnson has announced, I will not run for re-election. So in 1968, it looked like the front runner was going to be Robert Kennedy. And that name Kennedy, people tied it back to JFK, and they saw the hope again. Well, then he is going to be assassinated. And two of our most predominant leaders in our country are now gone. And the question is, what do we do now? We go into November, and the Democratic Party is split. They don't have a strong, they have too many candidates. They don't have a strong candidate. And when you go down to the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, you're going to have all these different factions showing up. You're going to have the anti-war protesters. You're going to have the pro-war protesters. You're going to have the political, supporters and all this other stuff. And what's going to end up happening is we're going to see, protests turn into riots. And then the police are going to be unleashed onto these protesters. And it's almost like we have a mini war zone in Chicago during the Democratic National Convention. And again, it's all on TV. The year is going to end with Nixon being elected. Republican Nixon will be elected into the presidency. Now, as we go forward, Nixon ran on the campaign of ending the war in Vietnam. And he called his program Vietnamization, which is the idea that we're going to start training. Instead of sending troops in, we're going to send trainers in, and they're going to train the South Vietnamese to fight on their own. And that way we'll be able to start pulling American troops out of there. In the meantime, though, Nixon is going to kind of go rogue using that Gulf of Tonkin resolution, and he is going to attack Cambodia. We're not fighting Cambodia, but he's going to send bombers in there to bomb Cambodia. And the American people who are already discouraged, who are already angry at the government, who are already worried that we're not going to win this war, are like, whoa, what are you doing? Are you starting yet another war? And so the war protests are going to start picking up. And you're going to see more and more, especially on college campuses all over this country. You're going to see protests come to Washington, D.C. and in every single major city. And some of those protests are going to turn violent. And we're going to see tragedies such as what happened at Kent State, where national troops or National Guards are called in to put down the Kent State protest. And they're going to end up firing it into a crowd. And 4 students are going to be killed as a result of that. And it just seems like everything is falling apart. Now, Nixon is going to introduce this Vietnamization. It's going to start coming into play. And by 1973, we're starting to pull our troops out. And then by 1975, we reach a ceasefire agreement with North Vietnam. Like we reached another stalemate similar to what we saw in Korea. The problem was North Vietnam was not going to honor that. So all of our American troops are gone. And once all of our American troops are pulled out, North Vietnam is going to reinvade South Vietnam, take control of the capital of Saigon, and just like that, Vietnam falls under complete communist control. We absolutely failed at containment in Vietnam. Now, I didn't mention before, Eisenhower had a doctrine for what we would be willing to do for containment. He expanded the Truman Doctrine and said that we would be willing to send troops into Asia as well to stop the expansion of communism. Nixon is going to introduce his doctrine. The Nixon Doctrine said, you know what? We will honor all the treaties we have with Asian countries and places like that. We'll honor those, but we're not going to be sending troops into any other nations to fight communism unless there is a direct nuclear threat. We'll send aid. We'll send money, but we're not sending people. That's the Nixon Doctrine, okay? But Vietnam ends in an absolute failure. So how many years? Almost 10 years of fighting. And all we have to show for it is another communist nation. Okay? So that's basically where we are with the Cold War. I kind of went through it all really quickly, but I want to talk real quick about Nixon's administration, because he wasn't just about ending Vietnam. He also, foreign policy. You got to talk about his foreign policy, his props. He is going to negotiate with both China and the Soviet Union and reach an agreement with both of them. And with China, using the American Olympic ping pong team, he is going to use their visit to China as kind of an open door to go in and say, hey, let's sit down and talk. And he is actually going to be the very first American president in history to visit the nation of China. And there we're going to reopen relationships with China, trade relationships and stuff like that. And so we're going to reopen that door that was closed in 1945, 1946. He is also going to negotiate with the Soviet Union. He's going to we're going to enter into, and I talked about this today in class, this time period of détente, where the Cold War basically starts cooling off. Both sides kind of take a step back and go, huh. And he's going to negotiate the SALT Treaty. It's called SALT I, the Strategic Arms Limitations Treaty. And the SALT Treaty, basically the Soviet Union and the United States are both going to agree to limit the number of nuclear weapons that they are producing. And this is a huge move forward. For the first time, we can kind of feel like we can breathe a little bit. That immediate threat is kind of loosened up a little bit. Going into his second term, though, what Nixon is going to face is something that has never been overshadowed, and that's going to be the Watergate scandal. Watergate is Nixon's downfall. It's going to be, I mentioned in the video that you guys just watched the other day, Nixon didn't have a lot of self-confidence. He believed a lot of people were trying to undermine him and topple his presidency. It started with leaks coming out of the White House of things that were going on. So he's going to bring in this group of men who will be called the plumbers, because they're going to stop all the leaks coming out of the White House so the press doesn't know what's going on. Then when a poll comes out, a single poll comes out that says Nixon is barely winning this election against Goldwater, the plumbers are going to shift their focus from stopping the leaks to getting Nixon reelected. What was the organization? It was called CREEP, the Committee to Reelect the Existing President, or something like that. But CREEP was the committee that was set up to reelect Nixon. The plumbers are going to try to get a competitive advantage by putting listening devices in the Democratic National Headquarters, which was located in the Watergate building. They're going to get caught. The people planting the bugs are going to get caught in this break-in. And they're going to trace it back to Nixon. They trace it back to the plumbers and then trace it back to Nixon. Nixon is going to swear up and down, I knew nothing about it. I had no involvement in it. I even have tapes to prove that I knew nothing about it. As soon as the word tapes come in, we're like, we want to hear them. The House is going to set up a committee to investigate the Watergate break-in. They're going to request the tapes. Nixon's going to say no. They're going to take him to court. And in the United States versus Richard Nixon, the Supreme Court is going to rule, give us the tapes. Nixon is going to turn over the tapes. Eventually, there's going to be some negotiations back and forth with the House committee chairman and stuff like that. When he finally turns over the tapes, he's going to end up firing or telling his attorney general to fire someone who didn't do a good job to protect him, and then the attorney general is going to resign. It's called the Saturday Night Massacre. But regardless, the tapes are now in the hands of the House Investigation Committee, and they are going to draw up articles of impeachment against Nixon. Because although they couldn't find anything on the tapes that said he explicitly ordered this, he absolutely knew about it. And so he covered up a crime. There were 18 and a half minutes missing, interestingly enough, from the tapes, but there was enough to bring about these articles of impeachment. Nixon's prepared to fight until his advisors came around and said, dude, you're going to lose. The House is going to impeach you, and bro, when you go into the Senate, it's not going to be pretty. That's when Nixon resigns before he can be impeached. That's going to bring Gerald Ford into the presidency. Gerald Ford is going to pardon Nixon, and then he'll serve out the remainder of his term. Ford runs for office against Jimmy Carter. We just talked about this in class today, so make sure you review those notes so you know everything that's going on. So that's my spiel. How much time did I spend? I spent almost an hour just kind of going through it, and I didn't touch on everything. So now is your opportunity to start asking me questions. Like I said, I didn't go over Carter because we just talked about him today. So what questions, I mean, a lot of stuff. I didn't talk about the U2 incident. Make sure you know about that. I didn't talk, let's see. I didn't bring up Israel and our relationship with them. And so I didn't, we talked about the Middle East today in class. So review that kind of stuff. So go ahead. What questions do you guys have? Nope. No questions, guys. Come on. Ooh. You guys are being very easy on me on this one. Last time I did this review with a class, we were on here for almost 2 hours, so nothing, eh? Okay. All right, guys, so here's what you're going to do. You're going to review the Cold War. Make sure you review civil rights. Okay, here's a question. Hang on. Thank you, Noah. Finally. All right, here we go. Can I talk more about how Egypt tried to nationalize the Suez Canal? Yeah. The Suez Canal, this is going to be during Eisenhower's presidency. What's happening is the Suez Canal was controlled by the English and French. Very similar to the United States and how we control the Panama Canal. The Suez Canal was built by the English and the French, and so they had control of it. The president of Egypt is going to, basically because it goes right through Egypt, he is going to nationalize it, meaning he is going to put it under Egyptian government control. And the Egyptian government control, when he does that, he's basically taking, control of something that's not his. So England and France and the United States are ticked off about this. The other country that's mad about it is Israel. Now remember, Israel was created in 1948, and we're talking, this is several years later, because if Egypt has control of the Suez Canal, they control what comes in and out of the Mediterranean Sea, and Israel depends on that canal to get goods in and out. And so, and at this point, Egypt is an enemy. So what's going to happen is Eisenhower wants to negotiate the return, but England, France, and Israel don't want to wait. So they're actually going to wage war. They're going to go to war with Egypt over the Suez Canal. This is going to tick off Eisenhower. He's going to be like, what is going on? We just got out of a war. We don't need another war. He's going to call upon the UN. The UN is going to get involved. They're going to go in and basically negotiate the, Egypt's, removal of its control over the Suez Canal. They're going to return it back to England and France. The crisis is averted. But this is what we're seeing. What we're seeing here, honestly, is the development of alliances within, between Israel and other Western countries. And we were a ally of Israel at this point. We just didn't want to fight. We wanted to try to negotiate first. And so that Suez Canal crisis is going to show us that there's going to be a lot of difficulty in dealing with the relationship between Israel and the rest of the Middle East. So that's all, that's what that crisis told us. Now, it wasn't a major war. They fought for a short period of time, but we did avert a major crisis with that, and that could have escalated into a much bigger war had the UN not stepped in. Tatiana, yes, the stuff we talked about today will be on the test. Carter, we go all the way through Carter, so that will be on there. Andrew, the U2 incident, that's going to happen in the 1950s when an American U2 spy plane is going to be shot down over the Soviet Union, and our pilot is going to be captured. I believe his name was Gary Powers was his name, and he is actually going to be taken into custody in the Soviet Union, and they're going to put on a public trial of him for spying. And that's going to show, I mean, it basically just proves that we were spying on the Soviet Union. Now, if you think back during the Geneva Conference in 1954, Eisenhower had introduced this idea of open skies between the United States and the Soviet Union, this movement to try to keep the peace, because we were kind of in a calm area at this point. And he says, hey, why don't we keep the skies above our countries wide open so we can each fly our own planes over there and make sure neither one of us is building any more nuclear weapons? Well, the Soviets said no. So we kept sending our spy planes over, and our plane was shot down. So it was very clear that we were spying on each other. So that was the U-2 incident. Okay, so this deals, why do we credit the rise of conservatism with Nixon, but policies were... Okay, what we saw with Coolidge and Eisenhower, what we talk about with the rise of conservatism with Nixon, Joseph, is new conservatism. Some of the ideas are the same, but what we started to see with new conservatism is this idea of we're going to introduce a moral majority to the fray. We're looking not just at the political and economics, but we're also looking at the social side of it, and that's what new conservative included. And so you have people like Jerry Falwell and stuff stepping up and saying that we need to, we don't just have the silent majority now, we have this what's called the moral majority in America. And some of the things we're seeing we don't like, because remember, during the going into the 1950s and early 1960s, coming up into Nixon's time period, we're going to see, things happen like, no prayer allowed in school, and abortion rights and other things coming to the forefront, where a lot of people had a moral issue with those questions. And so this idea of new conservatism is going to embrace those issues and make it part of who they were. So we're not like taking anything away from Coolidge or Eisenhower, because there absolutely were a lot of economic policies that were very similar to Nixon, but we're adding in this social part to it as well. So hopefully that makes sense. Couple other questions coming in here. Hang on just a second. Fix this. Okay, so let's see what we got here. Oh, I got YouTube comments as well. I think those are the ones I saw. Rebecca, let me check. Oh, yeah. So I'm getting those. Thank you so much, though, Rebecca. I appreciate that. I have that in my chat window here, too. So, could we contribute the rise as being rooted in Eisenhower's socially moderate... I honestly, you know what, Joseph, I don't know that I would go that far and to say that it was rooted, because Eisenhower was more moderate. And what you're going to find with this role of new conservatism is it's going to be more conservative. Eisenhower was very much middle of the road. And we're going to see this new fray move further to the right. So I don't, it's not about social... Like Eisenhower liked social programs that would help Americans. What this moral majority was looking at was these programs and what the effect they were having on the health of society, not the physical health, but the moral health of society. And that's kind of what we're looking at there. So that's kind of how I look at it. And you're going to see that same mantle. It's going to be picked up by Reagan as we move forward, but we'll talk about that next week. So I would say, honestly, if I was going to contribute the rise to anything, I would contribute it to a lot of the behavior that you see during the late 1960s. The sexual revolution, the protest movements, some of the Supreme Court decisions that are going to be made. These are a lot of decisions that a lot of Americans at the time never thought would actually come to fruition, and they are. And so you're going to see, like I said, 1968, a complete turning point for America, not only in how we feel about our government, but also who we are as an American people. Our personality absolutely started to change. And so we're going to see this new conservatism kind of try to start fighting some of those changes. Not all of them, but a few of them. All right. Alger Hiss, Noah asked who Alger Hiss was. Alger Hiss was a scientist who, going into the 1950s, is going to be accused and really readily admits that he actually sold plans of our atomic bomb to the Soviet Union, or he shared our plans for our nuclear weapons with the Soviet Union, which is that's going to allow them to build their own bomb. And that's when we realized with Alger Hiss that there were spies amongst us. And that's going to elevate the Second Red Scare. And that's going to elevate McCarthyism. And Alger Hiss is going to name names. And two of the names he's going to name are the Rosenbergs. Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, who he claimed were also part of this plan to sell nuclear information to the Soviets. And this couple is actually going to be convicted of treason, and they're going to be executed. Now, it will come out later that there was some pretty good evidence later that Julius Rosenberg was involved, but that evidence wasn't at the forefront when he was put on trial, but he was still, both he and his wife were still convicted. So that's who they are. They kind of launched the Second Red Scare. Do I think we would have seen the rise sooner had Nixon beaten Kennedy? It's hard to say, because you got to remember everything that happened in the 60s led to the rise of this conservative movement. And I don't know what Nixon would have done. I don't know how Nixon would have handled Vietnam. I mean, maybe he would have gone in and you know, I don't know, used a bomb and just settled it that way quicker. Or not gone in at all. So without those decisions, because each step that we go through from the late 1950s through the 1960s is a step closer to this new conservative movement starting. And if you take out one of those steps, if 1968 had never happened, I just don't know that we would have seen that much of a change. So Nixon coming in, he was absolutely a conservative, but you know, again, that moral majority, that is a big part of that movement, and we didn't really have need to question that in 1960 like we did in 68, as far as the people were concerned. That silent majority was concerned. No, they were paid by the Soviet Union, Afrin. These were people that they sold this information to the Soviet Union, American citizens that did that. So, and that's when McCarthy came out and said, oh, we got more spies in the State Department. I have a list of 104 names, and I'm going to prove it to everybody. And that's what led to the McCarthy hearings and everything like that. And we know in the end, McCarthy never produced one single name, but we went through this blacklisting of other of people in Hollywood and people, neighbors turning in each other and stuff like that, because there was this threat that you didn't want to be accused of being a communist. So, why weren't people in the war in Vietnam treated well when they came home? Primarily because of what happened after I'm telling you guys, 1968 is such a pivotal year in our history. That's when we learned about we're not going to win, that we're fighting to a stalemate. That's when we first heard about the My Lai massacre. And so the story that gets out is that our American soldiers, whether it was true or not, we just had this one reference in My Lai. And so we said, oh, they're over there killing women and children, and they're baby killers. And how dare you go over there and fight like that in that war and everything like that. And you are part of the problem. You're not just following orders. You could have avoided it. You didn't have to go. And so we're blaming you, soldiers, for everything that's going on in Vietnam. And so they came back and they called them baby killers, and they called them rapists, and they called them whatever they could. And they blamed the Vietnam War on the soldiers as much as they did on the government. And that's what happened when they came back. Andrew, that is a fantastic question. Do I think that Nixon's background in HUAC contributed to his paranoia? You know what? I've never even thought of it that way, but I wouldn't be surprised, because look at that. The House of Un-American Activities Committee, their whole job was to find people who were spies, who were trying to infiltrate America and undermine everything we were doing and undermine democracy. So I don't know why he wouldn't think that. That is a fantastic point. I never even considered that, but I think you're absolutely right. I think that it was ingrained in him going forward. That, you know, man, they're out to get us, and I got to get them before they get me. So yeah, I think that's a man. I never even thought about that. I love when you guys impress me like that. So, okay, I got that question. Alger his. Anything else, guys? I'm scrolling through. Any questions about civil rights? Because I didn't really talk a lot about civil rights. So if you have any questions about that, now's the time to ask. Don't forget Nixon and his environmental actions. So you're going to have like he's going to start the EPA. He's going to have the Water Equality Act, the Clean Air Act, the Environmental Protection Act. All of that is under Nixon. So keep your eye on that. The women's movement, you're going to want to look at that. Look at the National Organization of Women and Betty Friedan and her movement for women, stuff like that. I do want to point out the Equal Rights Amendment. I don't know if you've come across this in the reading guide that you did. I'm just going to tell you flat out, the biggest failure of the National Organization of Women was the fact that the Equal Rights Amendment never passed. It passed through Congress, but the states never signed it, and that's going to be the work of Phyllis Schlafly. She is going to work against the ERA amendment. So if anyone asks what is the biggest failure of the National Organization of Women and the women's movement of the 60s and 70s, this was that we never got the ERA passed, the Equal Rights Amendment. My dog's chewing on something. Hang on just a second. What are you chewing on? Ah, come here. Drop it. Okay. All right, guys. Let's see. Any more questions? All right. I don't see any more questions. So, I think that's gonna do it. I'm scrolling through the review guide. Everything else is pretty much straightforward. I think the majority, I'm going to be honest, I mean, there's questions from all these different things, but obviously about civil rights, there's questions. Were the Black Panthers, no, the Black Panthers are they're not going to be around when MLK is going to be around. Well, wait. Yes, they are. Because MLK is not assassinated. I was thinking he was assassinated in 63. That was Kennedy. MLK is going to be assassinated in 68. The Black Panthers, they will be an organization at this point that is around. They're going to gain momentum though after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. because they actually started as a community organization. They wanted to work with the community in Oakland is where they got started, and they're actually going to have like a clothing drive and education drives and stuff like that. But then they're going to get more radical, and so they got their start in, like I said, a couple years before King was assassinated. But they're conflicting with Martin Luther King, because remember, Martin Luther King was all about nonviolent protest. No matter what they do to you, you never fight back. And we know that there's times where Black Panthers, they carried around weapons with them and stuff like that. So if you want to break it down, and I mean, this is kind of it's a tepid comparison, so be a little careful with it. But I often think of Martin Luther King and his nonviolent programs kind of lined up with I don't know, maybe with Booker T. Washington a little bit, whereas W.E.B. Du Bois would kind of line up with the Black Panthers because they wanted that immediate satisfaction. But King did too, so maybe that's not the best comparison. They're definitely offshoots of one another. You also had I'm drawing a blank on the guy's name. You also had people, they believed in segregation. They wanted to have separate societies, because there was still movements that said we cannot all live together. It's just not going to happen. So you're going back to, I'm drawing blank on name now, the guy in the 1920s who with the Black Star Line, that he wanted to segregate the African Americans as well. So, all right. Anything else? Okay, so here's the deal. Because we're doing the review tonight and the test is not until Thursday, you're going to have the opportunity to ask questions during class tomorrow as well. So you have this review here that we just had. You can look at the notes from today. You can look through your notes. You can look through the study guide and everything, because that's not due until Thursday. And bring questions tomorrow. Bring questions where we can actually extend this review into class time tomorrow. So that's the benefit of doing this tonight. So with that, because of that, I'm going to go ahead and say goodnight right now. And I'll see if I can get him up here. Come here, Flynn. Because you still got to be able to see Flynn. Let's see if I can get him up here. Flynn has an ear infection, so he's a little skittish right now. Come on. Come here. Come on. Get up. He's afraid I'm going to put stuff in his ears. Come here. Hey. No, he's walking away. I'm still going to try. Come here, bud. Get up there. Come here. Come here. Hey, come say hello. Come on. Get up. Oh, come here, you. He'll pick up the boy. He's probably going to yelp. Come here. All right. There he is. There's Flynn. Say hello, Flynn. All right. So here's your... Oh, you stink. Here's your good luck charm. He's saying, do well on the test. He says, Mom's going to help you tomorrow in class, so bring questions. Other than that, guys, we're going to say goodnight. Oh, thank you. I love you too. We're going to say goodnight, and we will see you tomorrow. Have a great night, guys.